We will now move on to our featured speaker for the symposium. Let me introduce the moderator first. That's going to be Henry, our very own Henry Lazenby. Intrepid reporter, was down in South Africa and in Indaba, then was reporting from VRIC, moderated a panel there. That was just such a wonderful, wonderful job for us, providing us leading coverage of the mining industry in the digital and physical pages of the Northern Miner. Let me cue up Henry here. He's an international journalist. He has over 10 years of experience heading up North American-focused research news desks for different multinational media houses. Back in his native South Africa, he was an award-winning community journalist before the B2B media market exposed him to mining. He ended up in Toronto. That secondment soon became permanent. Well, sort of permanent in Canada anyway, Henry. Besides frequent visits to mining and exploration project sites and participating in industry conferences, he specializes in covering the North American and international mineral exploration, mining, and metals markets. He's now based out of Vancouver, and he writes and produces multimedia content, mainly for the Northern Miner. Has done some stuff for the mining.com, but going forward, it's going to be more of a Northern Miner focus. Henry, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Anthony. I'm quite well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing great today. I'm off to a great start and really looking forward to your conversation with Maureen. So I will pass over to you and you can make the introduction.
Indeed, so thank you very much. All right, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our featured presentation today with Maureen Jensen. Maureen attended the University of Toronto, where she earned a BSc in geology in 1979. She is perhaps best known for a role as the first female to head the Ontario Securities Commission, where she championed policies to improve investor protection and encourage diversity for executives and directors of public companies. Before joining the OSC, Jensen served as the Senior Vice President for Surveillance and Compliance at IROC and President at Market Regulation Services. She also held senior positions at the Toronto Stock Exchange, including Director of Mining Services during the aftermath of the Bre-X scandal. Interestingly, she was a TSX member of the Mining Standards Task Force that laid the groundwork for National Instrument 43-101. That standard obviously became a globally recognized disclosure standard for mining projects. We'll leave her long list of accomplishments at that, but there is certainly, these are not the only in her distinguished and successful career. Maureen has received broad public and industry recognition for her many achievements, including being inducted into the Canadian Hall of Fame, Mining Hall of Fame, later this year. Welcome, Maureen. It's a great pleasure to have you join us today.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well then, so let's jump right into it. I guess from your varied and successful career, it is clear that you can opine on a broad spectrum of mining industry themes. Before we get to that, take a moment to reflect on your career. What would you say were some of the key highlights from your point of view?
Well, if I start right at the beginning, I grew up in mining towns everywhere between Winnipeg and Sudbury. And my dad was a mining engineer. And when I went to university, I decided I'd take a geology course. And by Christmas time, that was it. I was going to be a geologist, and my mother cried for the rest of the 4 years. She wanted me to be a doctor, of course. But I would say that I started out in exploration, and I had some incredible mentors. I was lucky enough in the mid-70s to have a female boss in the bush camp that I was working in with a lot of women. And so I never thought that I couldn't do anything. But it was tough for women at the beginning. But let's say I worked underground as a beat geologist, and then as a mine geologist, and then chief mine geologist. I worked with a mining contractor, so I've done all kinds of things like raises and drifts, and worked underground. I've worked in excavating a large hydro tunnel. I worked all over North America and Central America and South Africa. And I will say that mining people are just amazing. You know, Anthony was just talking about mining geeks. Well, that's what happened in our family. I'm married to a mining engineer, and at some point our kids said, "Mom and Dad, no more mines. We're not going on mining holidays anymore." So, yeah,
mining holidays.
Yeah, and then of course we went through BRIEX.
Yeah,
and I thought it was really time that we had a better mining standard in Canada. And so started working on that. And that led me to looking at regulations of all kinds, and led me to being in the financial business for over 20 years. So it's been quite a ride, but I've never left my mining roots. I've always advocated for mining because it is the best business in the world.
Right, right. Well, with that, we can conclude this conversation, right? No, that's truly a fascinating history. Thank you very much. It was also recently announced, as we've mentioned several times by now, that you will be inducted into the Canadian Mining Hall of Fame in August. Perhaps, you know, from your personal perspective, again, you know, what does it really mean to become an inductee? Is this like the icing on top of everything that you've been working towards in your life, or what's your take on it?
Well, first of all, I didn't believe it when I got the notice. If you look at that incredible list of people who are in the Mining Hall of Fame, I thought, no, you know, I haven't found a mine, but I love this business. And for me, it's like getting an Oscar. This is it, right? I will say that it's absolutely thrilling that the Mining Hall of Fame is looking broader than simply, you know, these incredible people who find mines and discover new processes. Mining is a life. It's a calling. And now what we're seeing are more people who have really changed rules and made certain that mining is part of the Canadian lifestyle. And I'm just thrilled to be recognized. I really can't believe it. I don't know what I'm going to say when I get up there when I see all of those amazing people, but it's a true honor. Yeah,
wonderful. Well, congratulations once more. All right, let's get into the more difficult part of this conversation. So obviously, as we've heard, you've been an advocate for innovation in the capital markets, basically from the outset. What would you say are some of your key thoughts on where the capital market industry trends and the status of innovation are at the moment, you know, and how they relate to mining?
So the financial industry is going through a huge change, and this change is it's the same type of magnitude of change as when we went to the internal combustion engine from horses. Everything is digital today, obviously. There's only really one or two exchanges that still have open outcry floors in North America. Everything has gone digital, but even more important than that, the financial markets have gone global. And that is a huge change. No longer are regional exchanges that important. Most large companies are now multi-listed in various jurisdictions. Some of them even listed enough to trade almost 24 hours a day. So that it's quite different. But we'll see, what we're seeing today is obviously digital finance, the inclusion now of crypto. Most regulators are now looking at crypto assets of all kinds, including non-fungible tokens, all kinds of things, so that they can be listed and traded on an exchange. Fractional shares has turned into a large business, and the rise of sustainable investing, obviously, is another one. Also the fact that the largest institutional shareholders, while they have always driven markets, they are now, some of them like Vanguard and BlackRock and others, are so large that they often have 20, 30, 40% of any fund. And that is enormous. That is going to change the world. We're also seeing new kinds of exchanges. I think you had NEO on the Northern Miner, the Global Mining Symposium last time or the time before. And so what we're seeing there is a a change in the type of exchanges, the listing criteria, and the amount of information that you can collect on a daily basis. You can set up your own triggers on some of those exchanges. So, and they're constantly looking for new things. So I will see, you'll have different types of funds on different types of exchanges. So I think that competition is very good. Not only that, in North America, what you're seeing are a huge amount of companies that are focused, their business is focused on collecting as much capital market traffic as possible, and then trading it internally in their books, and then moving it to the exchange. So the entire platform has changed. And the other thing is surveillance obviously has caught up to all of this. And now a lot of surveillance is done with AI and algorithms. So it's a different world. And it's a world that mining is very involved with. And so people will see mining shares. I know at the beginning when we started looking at these multiple markets, people were saying, how are these mining securities moving so quickly, and how come so much is trading? It was because of those third-party wholesalers. They were moving the markets themselves with their algorithms.
Okay, so basically all of the above mentioned ways of how the markets are innovating. So from a regulatory standpoint, I'm sure you've got your hands full. Would you say today's securities regulators can keep up with the brisk pace of innovation? Given the advent of cryptos and fungible tokens,
right?
And also the variety of new financial products.
Right. Well, I would say to you that yes, I think securities regulators can keep up. They themselves are now using AI in some of their own work. I would say that you don't want your regulators out in front of the innovation. You want them to understand the innovation before they start making rules, because that's where mistakes happen. So one of the things that I'll give you an example the OSC is doing is they now have a lab. And so this test lab that they've put up, we had one while I was there where we were bringing in people and helping them get crypto listed to bring them in to understand how you could use a blockchain, how you could use the crypto assets. Now they're actually bringing in AI products that businesses and investors can use to trade, and they're testing them themselves. So I think they are keeping up. If you imagine back just even 4 or 5 years ago, before you had cannabis shares listed, they were quick, first in the world, to have a crypto disclosure regime put in place. We did the same thing with crypto, started looking at the exchanges that were trading them and trying to license them so that they would do it appropriately. Obviously, some didn't get licensed and they blew up.
Well, you mentioned previously, when we were kind of preparing for this session, the Quadrica scandal also, that was like in recent memory, one of the more egregious cases where the regulatory, systems didn't catch it in time. Do you have any, insights into that scandal and what transpired?
Well, yeah, at the time, the OSC did release a public report on their investigation there. So that was the time right at the beginning when they were not regulated at all. And that particular one was in BC, and they actually published that they didn't want to regulate cryptocurrency exchanges. But the issue there is not whether or not it was regulated. The point was the people that owned that, and particularly the one principal, he was just using other people's assets to trade, and he traded off of his own exchange onto other exchanges, and he lost money. So basically, that was just crime. Right.
Well, then maybe, talking about the crimes that you were fighting, during your time at the OSC, perhaps regale us with one of the most egregious cases you had to deal with. And I'm guessing it's probably going to be BRIX, right? But maybe there's something else you can, throw our way.
Yeah, well, I wasn't there during BRIEX. I was at the exchange as trying to help sort out the mess after BRIEX. The issue is that every time there's a market downturn, let me tell you that there's a group of people who are just fraud artists, and they will. So if there's a downturn in mining, they will gravitate to mining shells and they'll start using them for other things. So there's lots of egregious things to talk about, but let me just talk about one that is really mining related. And it's not the most egregious, but it's a good example of what not to do. How about that?
Yep.
So this is Katanga. And Katanga ended up paying something like $35 million in fines for what they did. And essentially Katanga was a small company that Glencore had vended in a property in the DRC. And it was obviously a cobalt and property, right? Mm. And what happened was their disclosures started looking odd. And after an investigation, they were charged with misleading disclosure, not only on their financial disclosure, but their operational disclosure and their salary disclosure. And over a 2-year period, and they had inflated their operational activities and their production and deflated it in another year. They had independent directors who were actually sidelined, and the Glencore directors were actually running the company without telling the independent directors what was going on. And on top of it, they were being investigated for bribery and they never disclosed it. Mm. And so here's a good example of a company who raised a significant amount of capital in the Canadian capital markets, but it was being run as if it was a private company within Glencore. And this is something that a lot of small companies face when they have a very significant shareholder. Now, this shareholder overreached dramatically, obviously, and did the wrong thing. But many small companies face this when you have a significant shareholder. So be careful, fully disclose, and even if the disclosure is uncomfortable for your main shareholder, it's something that you must do.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for those insights. Okay, let's switch gears a little. Drawing on your varied boardroom experience, you have encountered working, with people in different settings in Australia, South Africa, the USA, and of course Canada. How does one effectively overcome cultural barriers to, effective mining administration?
Well, I'll start. The first thing is don't talk politics in the boardroom. That's bad. But so one of the things that I've found, and I've been sitting on boards now for almost 30 years. And one of the things that it is absolutely important to have are different voices around the table with different experiences and different backgrounds. You never know where your next big risk is coming from. And certainly today, we know that there are a lot of big risks out there. But the worst travesty, I would say, is a wonderfully operating company that hits a risk and they take the wrong decision because everyone in the boardroom has the same view. So I think broad experience is really important. Some of the, I'll just give you one from the headlines in the last few years. Theranos, that's a good fake it till you make it, right? They pretended that they had something, and yet everybody on their board, none of them had any pharmaceutical or scientific experience. They were all ex-government people. Another good one is Equifax. Do you remember when Equifax lost all of that data?
Yes.
They lost the financial data of over 40% of US citizens.
Yeah.
And on that board, they did not have a single IT person that knew anything about privacy or data protection or IT. So there's a good example, two good examples of what you really need. You think about where mining is going in the next decade or so. We're going to have a lot of ESG oversight. So you need people who, and it's a digital world and it's a global world. So if you're doing business in Chile, you should kind of have somebody that understands that world. If you are doing, you know, your supply chain is coming out of, for example, China, you should understand what's going on there. You know, there's just some terrible examples where companies have just not understood what they were moving into. And I will tell you right now, certainly in the financial world, if you don't have somebody on your board that understands AI and digital finance, you're in trouble. Yeah. So I would just say to everyone, understand your risks, understand your technology, and understand the changes you need to make in the next decade, and make sure you have some board members that do that. Yeah,
yeah. Well, keeping it around the boardroom table, you know, have you seen more diversity creep into executive circles? Or how would you gauge boardroom diversity in mining today? You know, do you think the laggards are perhaps missing out on opportunities?
Well, I think they are. What I'm finding, well, now the data shows that about a third of board seats are held by women, but almost all of them are old white women like me. And so, right, and so we're starting to see more and more diversity come into the boardroom. I would say to you that some of the biggest diversity that I've seen has come in through IT experience. And because many IT folks have come from other places, and they're usually younger, and so it's a more diverse workforce. I would say that still in mining, obviously at the CEO and senior executive level, there's few women, but that's also changing. And part of that is the younger boomers. There were more women in mining to start with at that, you know, at the entry age 30 years ago. And so you're now seeing that change. But you don't need to have mining, like people from the mining side. You see a lot of lawyers, a lot of accountants, a lot of engineers, and there's lots of women there, and there's lots of people of different backgrounds. The other thing is mining is a global business, and so people are now trading around their executives, and so executives are on the move, so you're seeing more diverse you know, E-suites.
All right, well, happy to hear those positive trends that you're pointing out in that regard.
But those that aren't diverse are very visible.
Right. Yeah, and I guess that ESG principles are exposing them for what they're doing, right?
Yeah, not just that, they're missing out in the talent work. If people can't see that they have the ability to move up in an organization, they self-select out. So if everybody at the C-suite is, you know, 60 years old and male, or 60 years old and female and blonde, whether it's real or not, then they will say, I don't look like that. I don't see a path for me.
Right. It's an important point, trivial as it might seem. But yeah,
yes, exactly. Yeah. It's those visual cues that get people to stay or go.
Very interesting. Okay, well, talking about missed opportunities, do you think that the net zero imperative holds an opportunity for the industry to reinvent itself? And from your point of view, you know, how can the industry capitalize on cutting down emissions, you know, while still turning a profit? So that's kind of a broad topic there, but what are your
right? Well, first of all, the net zero transition, as everyone is calling it, it's going to be a longer transition than everybody is talking about. You know, net zero 30, 50, maybe longer. But yes, in mining now, new businesses that are coming on stream, new operations, they need to think about what's the length of time that they have. Can they move to fully electrified now? Should they take that risk now? Do the economics of the deposit actually work for them? So, and I think that's what people are going to be doing. They're going to be looking at that. We all know that mines aren't necessarily found underneath a power line at the end of a paved highway. And so there's going to be a lot of issues that you have to take into account. But we will have to slowly electrify. We will have to think about what of the principles, you know, for the sustainable principles every company can work on. No one needs to deliver on every single sustainability principle. You need to think about what your company can do and how to get there. You'll probably choose 1, 2, 3 things that you can actually accomplish. And so I think over time, mining has always been innovative when they had to. This is going to be one of the times that you have to. And so because you want to be able to have access to reasonable financing. And so that comes with strings on the ESG side today. But I think mining people are pretty smart. We'll move to electrification of vehicles. We've already started looking at recycling of water. There's going to be a lot more skills training, not only in within their own companies, because things will be changing and digitizing and moving to digital activities and robotics. And we'll see that kind of training into remote communities as well, so that they can actively participate. So I think mining will get there, but it's going to be a bit of a bumpy journey, because let's face it, we don't know what we're transitioning to. We're transitioning to electricity, but you know, wind and solar are only part-time.
Yeah. It's a process.
It's a process.
Well, so you've peppered your previous comments really with, you know, what I want to ask you next. So it's a nice segue of sort, but I hope you've got more things to say. So, you know, what would your biggest piece of advice be to companies currently navigating the green revolution? You know, it really presents a myriad of challenges, as we've already heard. You know, it's a lot hinges on innovation, creating new winners and losers. You know, from your point of view, what's the biggest piece of advice that companies can benefit from at this stage?
Well, I wish I was brilliant and I could give you something, you know, really quick and to the point. But I just want to tell you that, I mean, we all know the world's changing, right? And it's changing on the macro side. We're going into a period of instability. We're getting into a world of two solitudes, Russia and China on one side and the rest of us on the other. That is going to change everything. We've already seen what it does to the oil and gas price. Also, oil and gas hasn't been, they haven't been exploring much lately because of the price changes a while ago. And the fact is, there's not a lot of people financing them for that. So what we can see is we're going to have oil prices move up. Digital growth, we talked about that. The other thing is, on the last map, and I just want to say is, we're getting out of the boomer time and we're going into the millennial time. Fewer workers, fewer people who've been involved in the mining business. So there's going to be a war for talent. There's a war for talent everywhere. There's going to be a big one in this particular business. So I would say that, you know, for mining, I would suggest that the most important thing is really focus on your risks. And if there's a way that a sustainability guideline or goal can help you address a risk, use it. Focus on what you can do. Don't focus on happy talk. Really focus on what you can do. You're going to have a more diverse workforce. You're going to have to train more. You're going to have to look at how you can interact with your communities better. I would say also, given what's going on the macro side, really think about diversifying your supply chain of key products that you need access to, because we're going to have armed conflicts, I think. And that's a scary thing to say. But ultimately, what I see is, you know, 100 years ago, what miners did and what we do today and what we're going to do in 100 years. Mining will always be needed. You're just going to have to really focus on how do you get the social license to do that. And you do that by being a good corporate citizen and having well-trained people who love working for you.
Yeah. All right. I don't see any questions from the audience at this time, so I'll perhaps follow up with another question. Something that I've picked up recently at industry conferences like the Indaba and at VERIC is that, there's this incredible need to find and develop new deposits of critical minerals, metals that we need for the new industry. But a recurring theme seems like, to me, is that ESG principles is like shining a new spotlight on grassroots engagement between miners and communities. Have you picked up that there's a renewed sense of urgency to really create meaningful engagement with communities and establish a just sharing of the mineral wealth with these communities? Is that something that you're seeing more relevant these days?
Yes, I think what's happening is whether you're looking at a grassroots exploration project or whether you're doing a bulk sample or even starting a mining project, what's happening now is that more and more of the communities, they want to understand, how is this going to benefit us? Not just, yes, we want a job, but more than that, how is it going to benefit us? And quite frankly, this has been around and happening for over 50 years. What the problem is, I think, is the difficulty of getting anything permitted. And that is, I don't think that's with the communities. I think that's with our government. And I think it's with governments everywhere now. And so people have to understand the importance of mining, and I think they're forgetting that. I think people do forget that if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. I mean, where do they think plastics come from? Where do they think, it comes from oil? Where do they think everything that they use in their cell phone? It comes from mining. So I think that is a problem. And until people understand that you can't just stir it up in a chemistry pot, you have to actually mine it. I think there will be a better understanding for that. But right now, our governments aren't helping. We really need to lobby for that.
Right. It's that same kind of paradigm where many people would think that a sandwich, comes from a supermarket fridge.
Yes.
It's really that paradigm.
Yeah. Guess what, folks? Chicken doesn't come looking like this. Right?
All right. So I've received 2 questions. Anonymous asks, are you satisfied with the speed at which securities regulators in Canada address fraudulent market activities? And as a second part to that, what are some of the biggest roadblocks that must be overcome when doing this work?
I do not think that we're quick enough. And part of the reason is the way the securities regulation system is set up. It's set up provincially, which means that you can have 2 or 3 investigations going on the same issue at the same time. You can't access the information unless the other regulator wants to give it to you. It is a problem. If we could put everybody together and have one focus, I think things would go faster. You'd have better resources to do that. And what could we do? We could have one securities regulator like the SEC, but don't forget that means you have one idea, right? So in the US, they worry about that. It's very important to stop a lot of this fraudulent behavior, but a lot of it is actual fraud, and it needs to go through the criminal courts. That's what we ended up doing at the OSC, and we put a lot of people in jail for pretending to be financial experts or mining experts, for that matter.
If I can just interject, Henry, quickly. Maureen, what, we've been talking about this one regulator in Canada for a long, long time. Why do we not seem to get traction? What is the biggest roadblock to that actually happening? And are you optimistic that it will happen within the next 5-10 years in our lifetime?
I am not optimistic it will happen in the next 5 or 10 years. It does not happen because no legislature in this country wants to give up control of their Securities Commission. Point. That's it. It's all about control.
That's discouraging. We do have more. Sorry, I had to interject there because Maureen's such an expert on it, and I had to take the advantage of getting her opinion. We do have more for the audience, so Henry, back to you for the audience questions.
All right, so we've got one more question that came in. So what is your general advice for companies considering an IPO at this stage?
Okay, get legal advice, first of all. But it depends on the size of the company, where you want to list, all of those things. Right now, if someone is thinking about an IPO for one of the new, battery metals, lots of interest. If someone is thinking about an IPO for a metal where the price is higher than it's ever been, great. There are, you have to find financing, and all of it is going to come with strings with ESG. So you must make sure that you have a really good idea of where you're going to work, how you're going to interact with the community that you're going to be with. But still, going public in Canada through an IPO for a mining company, it still is the best place to go public.
Okay, and then finally, I'll roll 2 questions from 2 audience members, Jeff and Jennifer, into one, which they ask, how do you win the war for talent? And connecting onto that, then, do you have any advice for senior male executives who are not actively participating in inclusion programs?
Yes. So how do you encourage people to join you? It's all about culture. That there's a place that they feel that they can thrive and move up, and that they get supported. And let's face it, everybody who is working really well in a company, what they need to thrive is sponsorship and mentorship. Give them an opportunity to grow, give them educational opportunities, introduce them to people so that they start seeing somebody who might be their mentor. As for a senior executive that isn't participating in these right now, I would just ask them to think about the incredible expertise and experience that you have in your brain. Share it with somebody. You don't want it to end with you. Share it, mentor them, and you'll get wonderful satisfaction of seeing someone thrive with your help.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for your time today, Maureen. That was the most informative discussion. With no further questions from the audience or from me, I'm going to send it back to you, Anthony. Thank you very much.
Maureen and Henry, a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Maureen.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.